Well, happy Easter, M12. For those of you guys that I haven't gotten to meet yet, my name is Alex Otto, and I get to be the student pastor over at our Sugarloaf campus. And because of coronavirus, you guys get to hang out with me this week inside my living room, so welcome. But just because things look a little bit different this year doesn't mean that we're not going to celebrate Easter together. So that's what we get to talk about today, Easter. See, many of you guys know the story of Easter already. But if you don't, I encourage you to grab your Bibles and go read John chapters 18 through 20 in the set aside time and place that you picked out with God last week. See, if you get the chance to read it, you're gonna find the story of Jesus at the end of his life. Jesus was God's son who had come to earth and lived life as a human perfectly. But in this story, Jesus was actually arrested, even though he'd done nothing wrong. He was beaten even though he was actually innocent. And he was nailed on the cross to die even though he deserved none of it. But guys, catch this. See, Jesus knew that all of that craziness was happening with a purpose. See, Jesus knew that his Father's plan was that he would die and then show that he was powerful against even death by raising back to life 3 days later. And reading this story 2,000 years later, most of us probably know that ending too. But go with me here for just a second. Just for a moment, I want you to maybe even close your eyes and I want you to imagine that you're not reading this in 2020. See, imagine that you're one of Jesus's disciples. Imagine that you have put your hope in Jesus, that you've believed in him, that you've trusted that he was the one who's come to save all people from their sins. But then the person that you've put all of this hope and trust and belief in over the last 3 years of your life was suddenly taken from you, beaten, and killed. See, for the disciples, the future looked pretty bleak. The disciples didn't know that he was going to raise from the dead 3 days later, defeating death. And so obviously they were pretty upset, right? The disciples were in a crisis. What they knew of their lives and their beliefs had just been stripped of them, and crisis mode began to overtake them. And in this crisis mode for the disciples, in the story, we actually begin to see some of their true character. See, they were afraid. Some of them were hiding. Some of them even lied about knowing Jesus. And others of the disciples actually went back to whatever they were doing before they even knew who Jesus was. And I don't know about you, but if I were a disciple, I'd probably have the same reaction. But guys, while we're reading this story 2,000 years later, there's actually something here that really connects with where I find myself today. See, in this season of feeling like coronavirus is taking over the world, I think that it would be safe to say that we are in a crisis, right? I think that if we were probably being honest, we would say that some of us might even feel afraid. Some of us have family who can get sick easily, or maybe who is sick now. Maybe for some of you, a parent just lost their job, or for some of you, you're disappointed about missing the end of this school year. Or maybe you just miss your friends and the things you used to do. And if we were more honest with each other, I might even say that like the disciples in our own crisis time, in our worry or fear or anxiety, we might be seeing parts of our own character that we don't like and we don't want. See, our character is who we really are. It's who we are behind closed doors. And crisis often exposes our character. So maybe you've been stuck in lying like some of the disciples. Or maybe you've turned back to some of the things you did before you even knew Jesus. Maybe in this crisis mode, your character is being tested. But listen, if that's you, you have to see what happens next in this story, because we don't just see the character of the disciples in this story. See, in all the craziness of the Easter story, more than the disciples, we actually see the character of Jesus. When Jesus had already died on the cross before raising up in front of everyone, he actually appeared to a select few people first. And in John chapter 21, Jesus appears early in the morning to the same disciples that were afraid and anxious and had even disowned him. And he says this to them. It's John chapter 21, verse 12. He says, "Come and have breakfast with me." See, after messing up and showing character flaws, I am sure that's not what the disciples expected to hear from Jesus. Guys, in this verse, Jesus was basically saying, I love you and I want to spend time with you anyway. But it's not just for the disciples. Students, let me remind you of something. This verse is the same for you. See, you are messy and broken at times, and so am I. And in this crisis, there have been times where our character has fallen. But Jesus is asking you to come and have breakfast with him, to come and spend time with him, to come to him in your messiness and brokenness and ask him to help you to have a character like Christ. See, sometimes we think that we have to be perfect before we can go to Jesus, but that's not the message of Easter. See, the message of Easter is that even though we fall and we fail, Jesus has covered us with the cross and changes us from the inside out. And that's good news. And so today I wrote down 2 questions that I want you to just ask yourself this week and talk to your community group about when you guys meet. They're this. Number 1, why do you think we feel the need to clean ourselves up before going to Jesus? And number 2, what parts of your character do you want Jesus to help you with? Hope to see you soon, M12.